Welcome to the Cyber 24 podcast, the weekly pod dedicated to helping businesses and governmental leaders better understand the often intimidating topic of cybersecurity so you can make better decisions for your organization. I'm Marty Carpenter of 24/9. I work in strategic communication, public affairs, government relations, and I'm joined today by our cybersecurity expert, Mike Hussey of the Utah Department of Technology Services. Mike, thanks so much for being on the show with us again today.
Thank you, Marty. Always a pleasure for me to be joining you, and especially to talk about these great cybersecurity topics. That's always a passion of mine.
Well, if you're able to join us, I always take that as at least a sign that there's not an emergency of any kind right now on the state side. So that's a good indication.
Things are good right now. So
when you show up, we're feeling a lot better about it. Hey, our topic this week: legislators looking to fight back against cyber criminals. They consider prohibiting state and local law enforcement from paying ransom to hackers. They say They say that making it known that they, as a state, and the governments that are part of that state will not negotiate with hackers, ultimately will make them less of a target. So the question is, are they correct? Now, according to the website gcn.com, there are 3 states in the mix on this right now, at least considering a policy of this type: New York, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina. So we should get it out of the way first. This is not Utah that we're talking about, but 3 different states entirely. So, Mike, I guess let's start here. I think that I can see the wisdom generally in the policy of we don't negotiate with terrorists, right? I mean, the U.S. is famous for that when it comes to anyone who would take a hostage. Hey, we don't negotiate, so there's just no profit in it. But I just don't get the sense that telling, the state government telling counties, cities, school districts, whatever may be under their purview in those individual states, or a commonwealth in the case of Pennsylvania, that they can't go out and solve a problem when a problem like this pops up, is going to be all that effective. What's your take on it, just when you hear that they're going to try to just tell everyone, don't pay?
Well, and just like you said, Marty, we don't negotiate with terrorists. And so let me start with this. The FBI and CISA both say, don't pay ransomware. That's the bottom line. But there's 2 really good conversations about whether to pay or not to pay. And the argument that the senator gives, whether or not they could be lucrative targets or not, she's saying, hey, there is some argument for her to say that if she takes that off the table, would cyber criminals just go somewhere else and look for a more lucrative target? Maybe. But as we discussed in prior podcasts, they have a really lucrative playbook here. And what they do is, we talked about some of the things they do is they say, hey, we stole your data. Not only are we going to lock up your operational activities, but we're going to release that data if you don't pay the ransom. And so, I was reading about Washington D.C. Police Department. They lost a lot of data. They lost maybe, I can't remember exactly, 250 gigs or something like that of data. Contained social security numbers, polygraph test results of the police officer, even information about their confidential informants. And the bad guys were saying, hey, if you don't pay the ransom, not only will operationally you'll still be down, but we're going to release this data. And so do you kind of get involved and say, hey, look, we want to tamp that down and let them just sell to the highest bidder, or what do you do? And these are difficult questions. And so it's one thing to have your 911 system back online, but it's another thing to have that kind of data out in the dark web for sale, and it's really an interesting discussion. And so, would the bad actors just go another way if they say, hey, time out, we're not going to pay the ransom, and then you just have to deal with the fallout of that? I think that you need to really look at the entire situation to say, hey, should we protect our data now that it's out there and get operationally turn things back on? Or do we just say, hey, we can live with this one, we'll restore from backup, we'll get back online, and operation will be up and running again? And so I think those are the conversations you need to look at. And I'm a little concerned at just saying, hey, we're going to take this off the table and say we never pay ransom, I think you need to look at the entire situation and say, hey, did they extort data? Did they actually just lock up systems? What did they do? And then make a judgment call. And again, just like you said, you don't negotiate with terrorists, you don't pay their ransoms. But I think in many cases you need to look at the entirety of the situation and decide what's the right thing to do.
Yeah, Republican State Senator Kristen Phillips Hill for Pennsylvania was quoted in the story saying, if criminals know that Pennsylvania will not pay a ransom, we're going to make ourselves a less likely target for those types of attacks. I would say yes, eventually. The second part of that quote, our citizens' personal information is on the line. We have to do everything we can to protect them. And the point I hear you making, Mike, is that by prohibiting a local government or a police department or school district, whoever, from paying a ransom not only might delay them getting back up and operating and providing the services that they need to, it also potentially exposes that information. So when she says, hey, our citizens' personal information is on the line, we've got to do our part. Well, as government tends to do sometimes in trying to solve a problem, they may exacerbate a problem at the same time. So it's really a tricky thing to try to figure out the right way to move forward.
Yeah, and that's the difficult thing, and that's why I say, hey, just to say, hey, we're taking that off the table, I would be a little reticent to say, yeah, that's the solution, and that the bad actors are going to go somewhere else. I feel like you need to look at the entirety of the situation you're in, and then make that call. So yeah.
Is it possible that the hackers would put this policy to the test? I mean, if you're bold enough as one of these states to come out and say, we don't negotiate with hackers. If we get hit with ransomware, we won't pay. There's a small amount of time that has to go into it for a hacker to go lock somebody up, right? So like they might just say, oh yeah, North Carolina, oh yeah, Pennsylvania, oh yeah, New York, here we come with full force. And suddenly you're not just dealing with sort of the one-off, hey, this school district got hit, this city got hit, ransom is covered by insurance, or it's a small amount that we've got to take care of. That
right
now all of a sudden you're really locked up. I just can foresee a situation where they'd say, they're sort of sticking their head out of the ground waiting to get whacked by saying, hey, we're not going to pay. Well, let's see how much pain you can take before you'll break on that.
Before you cave,
I just would see that as sort of the next wave that would come to hit them.
No, and actually, the hackers, I hate to use the term, they've made an investment in surveilling and understanding states and even plotting their next move or waiting for a 0 day to come out, and where they've built a large understanding of the state, and then they're going to poke and prod when a 0 day comes out, and then they're going to start looking at ways to have you over a barrel. And so, there's a lot of investment that these bad actors have made in the states. And I don't believe just by saying, hey, we're going to take that ransomware payment off the table, that they're going to go away. I honestly don't believe that. And I think that just passing a law to ban ransomware payments to test the fortitude of states is really something I think they will do. They'll say, hey, we'll test that policy. We'll see if you're willing to cave or not, because they've made quite an investment. I sometimes talk about how much we see at the state, and I think every state is dealing with this. I think every state is dealing with the same numbers that we're seeing, which a lot of it is surveillance traffic. A lot of it is them building a profile about the state and what you look like and where your threats may be when something comes out down the road. And so they've made this large investment in this, and so they're just waiting for something to say, hey, let's test your fortitude here, and let's see how well your policy stands up. And I think, these guys are they're bright, and they're willing to poke and prod and test. And I think that they would really test this policy if these states pass that. And again, I just don't think they're going to go away. But I do think that they'll test your will.
Yeah. Reports say that in 2020, around 110 state and local governments were impacted by ransomware. I actually thought that number was surprisingly low, but nearly 1,700 schools, colleges, universities were also hit. I don't know if they're a bigger target because of more students with email addresses and accesses into systems and so on. But I get the frustration, but I think we're in agreement, Mike, that the better use of time and energy might be to help local governments build an adequate defense, and even have insurance policies in place, have backups and gapped backups and all that, rather than just trying to essentially outlaw crime.
Right, and I agree. I mean, those statistics, they do seem low, but they still, they represent a lot of money that they've gone after, these bad actors, and so it shows that they're not just going to go away. They'll test your will. They'll test these laws that are passed, and they'll say, hey, this is what we've got. Are you willing to stand by that law, or do you want to have your system back online and your data back? And I think that I'd be a little cautious of just saying, hey, you can no longer pay them. And again, I have to fall back to the position that FBI and CISA say don't ever pay them, but I've seen situations and been involved in situations where we were able to negotiate the ransom down, and it was probably much less painful than if they would have not paid the ransom and tried to rebuild. It was probably less costly to pay the ransom and get their system back online.
Yeah, of course, here in Utah, we've had, just as recently as in the last month or so, Clearfield City get hit with ransomware. And by the way, just to give some update on the progress of these pieces of legislation in North Carolina specifically, the North Carolina House has passed the legislation. The House actually approved the measure unanimously, 114-0. You don't even see unanimous votes in primarily Republican Utah, but 114-0 in May, and it's under consideration by a Senate committee at this point. All right, time to take a break, but first a reminder that Cyber 24 is presented each week by our friends at Valcom. Valcom is a Utah-based IT solutions and services provider with a drive for getting IT right, from ironclad security to computing and beyond. Valcom's 35-plus years means they have the experience and the expertise to help your business from desktop to the data center. Check them out at VLCM.com. Back with more on the Cyber 24 podcast presented by Valcom right after this. With the increasing number of employees working remotely everywhere around the world, businesses are now looking at supporting a mostly, if not fully, remote workforce. But just because security at the office is no longer a high priority, that doesn't mean that remote security should be overlooked or be difficult to manage. To enable remote work security at your business, Valcom recommends WatchGuard Automation Core. WatchGuard's automation security platform speeds up processes, kills threats, and empowers IT teams to do more with less. With WatchGuard, you can apply zero trust principles across networks and applications and help remote employees enable secure Wi-Fi networks. To learn more about remote work security, visit vlcmtech.com/WatchGuard. That's vlcmtech.com/WatchGuard. Servers are a key component to keeping your business up and running, but when was the last time you stopped to think about the security features on those servers? Hewlett-Packard Enterprises has you covered. Introducing the world's most secure standard servers, Gen 10 servers from HPE. Maximize performance, achieve more in the same time, and lock down security features right down to the silicon. Gen 10 security features work at the firmware level, utilizing customized HPE silicon. Each Gen 10 server has a unique individual fingerprint, meaning that your server will not boot unless the firmware matches the print, locking the server end to end. Valcom is ready to help you refresh old, outdated server hardware. As a long-standing HPE Platinum partner, they have the skills and the expertise to help you maximize data center efficiency without stretching the budget. Learn more about HPE Gen 10 security protection at vlcmtech.com/Gen 10. That's vlcmtech.com/Gen 10. Welcome back to the Cyber 24 podcast presented by Valcom. We continue our discussion with Mike Hussey from the Utah Department of Technology Services. And Mike, we were talking in the last segment about this effort in 3 states to prohibit smaller governments, city governments, county governments, police departments, what have you, from paying ransom. And it kind of leads to the question we didn't get to in that segment. Is there a better way to help local government than just outlawing the payment of ransom?
And Marty, I think that's the really the $1 million question, or in this case, maybe $500 million question, because there's some legislation working its way through Congress right now, and it looks like there's a lot of support with the White House, and Senator Maggie Hassan of New Hampshire is working on this infrastructure bill that will bring $500 million in grants to state and local governments, including tribal governments, and it's part of a larger $1 trillion infrastructure security bill. But when you see $500 million earmarked for state and locals to build a better defense, I think that's the right kind of support to bring, rather than a no ransom bill to help them shore up the defenses. So this is, I think, the better way to go. And so really you need to focus on, I think, partnerships with the feds and states and locals and tribals to help share intelligence, et cetera. And that's something that worked its way through Utah legislature last year, and it didn't quite get over the hump where the state would help some of the counties that are struggling with resources to shore up their defenses. But now that you see this kind of action and activity at the federal level, and actually there's a request in with some of this ARPA money to help DTS work with locals, I think that's the right kind of resources to build an adequate defense for some of these folks that may be struggling out there.
Yeah. You know, it leads me to think of another type of partnership that's out there, and a way that some of these local governments can have resources dedicated to helping them. You know, more and more frequently, governors are turning to the National Guard to help with cyber attacks. And we just had an exercise that was hosted in Utah at Camp Williams in the last couple of weeks. So I'd love to just get your perspective as someone has led cybersecurity efforts for a state. What role does the National Guard play in any state, or in Utah in particular, in addressing cybercrime?
Yeah, and that's really a great question, because they can be a very valuable partner in preventing cybercrime. And like you said, they have these exercises occasionally where they come in and they'll run a tabletop exercise, and that just really test your readiness for a response if you fall victim to some challenge. And they'll toss out a challenge like, hey, the cyber bad guys were able to reverse the airflow on this SCADA device, which is a hood that takes all the when you're working in these very controlled environments, and they reverse the airflow and what kind of impact that might have. And so you look at these SCADA systems and you look at how ready you are to respond to something like that, and something you never even considered. They'll throw these hypothetical situations out there and then test your readiness and see, hey, how did you respond here? How did you respond there? And so to really prevent some of these really challenging issues, the National Guard has been vital. And so we've really looked at them as a partner and trying to figure out how to bring them on as more of a partner to respond to some of the challenges that we're seeing at the state, and also some of the resources that they might have at their disposal.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned bringing them on as more of a partner. Where do you see the relationship going over the next decade between the National Guard and states, and the National Guard, states, and more local governments?
Well, and just like as I was talking about the preventing cyber issues, they're also a great resource for response. And so just like any other issue, or when disaster strikes, you call in the National Guard, there is that same kind of mentality where you call in the National Guard when cyber disaster strikes, and you bring them in as a resource. Now, and it's great to have them, but what we're doing now is we're seeing them as partners in our cyber center. So instead of trying to figure out how to establish that relationship when disaster strikes, you have a proven track record with them. You have a regular cadence. You know all the players. You bring them together in the cyber center early on, and that's what we're doing now. And so I see in the next decade continuing to shore up that relationship and seeing them just sitting around the table with you. And so again, when the disaster strikes, you're not trying to figure out the right players. You already know who the players are. You know who needs to do what. And they have, I mean, in the case of a ransomware, you might be needing to visit a lot of computers and touching them, and they would be a great resource. Of course, the governor has to activate the National Guard, and there may be some costs around that, but that's the last thing you're thinking about when you're in the middle of a disaster. And so they could be a very valuable resource to bring to the table when disaster is struck.
Yeah, interesting, because it's sort of trending toward an all hands on deck and better coordination amongst the good guys is good news for the good guys, and maybe not such good news for the bad guys.
You're right.
All right, Mike, thanks so much for your insight on this. As always, want to thank you for taking time out of your day to come be part of the show. As we wrap up for this episode, I want to thank our sponsors at Valcom. At Valcom, you get much more than a dedicated IT retailer. They become an extension of your IT team. Whether you're a startup or an enterprise, Valcom has the technical sales and engineering expertise to make your business more effective and more productive. Check them out at VLCM.com. That's VLCM.com. Special thanks, as always, to our supporting partners, the Utah Department of Technology Services, Mr. Hussey, Kim C. Gardner Policy Institute at the University of Utah, Secuvant, the Utah Attorney General's Office, and the Utah Department of Public Safety. You can follow us on Twitter at cyber24_, or you can follow us on Facebook as well. Hit us up in either place. Let us know what you think, or if you have a topic you'd like us to discuss on a future episode. You can also rate and review the podcast if you're on Apple Podcasts. We appreciate those 5-star reviews. Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend. Stay safe online.